There was a girl in my organic chemistry class. I'll call her Maya. She sat 2 rows in front of me, and she did something that made me furious for an entire semester. While the rest of us were pulling 6-hour study marathons before exams, highlighting entire chapters until the pages looked like abstract art, rewriting notes until our hands cramped. Maya would show up to the library around 7 p.m., open her laptop, work for about 90 minutes, close it, pack her bag, and leave. 90 minutes. I'd watch her walk out while I was still sitting there surrounded by cold coffee and color-coded flashcards, grinding through hour 4 of what felt like an endurance contest I was definitely winning. Then the grades came back. Maya, 94. Me, 78. Every single time. After the 3rd exam, I stopped being angry and started paying attention. Because 3 exams in a row isn't luck, it's a pattern. And patterns have explanations. So I started watching how she prepared. Not in a weird way, in a desperate, what am I doing wrong way. I noticed what she did in the first 5 minutes before she even touched the textbook. I noticed what she skipped. And one day after a midterm, I asked her straight up, "How do you study so little and score so high?" 7 words. "I don't study what I already know." That sentence sounded obvious, like something off a Pinterest board. But the more I watched Maya, and the more I watched the other top scorers, the more I realized they were all doing something the rest of us weren't. Not a technique. Something earlier. Something that happened before they opened the book. 3 specific decisions that completely changed how much learning they extracted per hour. This video is about those 3 decisions. They're metacognitive moves, decisions about how you're going to study, made before you study. And the research behind all 3 explains why one student pulls 4 times more learning out of an hour than another using the exact same textbook, in the exact same library, 3 chairs away. If you've ever been the hardest working student in the room and still not the highest scoring one, this is why. And it's fixable. Starting with your very next session. Here's why you keep adding more hours even though it's not working. Your brain runs on a built-in equation that feels completely true. More time studying equals more learning. It's intuitive. It's what your parents reinforced when they said, "Go study more." It's what your teachers rewarded when they praised how long you stayed at the library. And it's almost entirely wrong. Kornell and Robert Bjork at UCLA ran a series of experiments showing that students' perception of how much they've learned during a study session has almost 0 correlation with how much they actually retained on a later test. 0. You can walk out of a 5-hour session feeling like you crushed it and retain almost nothing. You can stumble out of a confusing 45-minute practice session feeling lost and retain everything. The sensation of learning and the reality of learning are running on completely separate tracks, and your brain can't tell the difference. 3 illusions keep this going. Fluency illusion. You reread a chapter, and the second time feels easier. Your brain reads that smoothness as, "I know this." But recognizing text and producing the concept from memory are completely different operations. You're confusing "this looks familiar" with "I can explain this on an exam." The highlight trap. You drag a yellow marker across a sentence, and your brain registers "processed." But highlighting is a hand movement. Your wrist did something. Your brain didn't. You could highlight an entire textbook and learn exactly as much as someone who used it as a doorstop. Time as proof. After 4 hours in the library, there's a pull to believe you must have learned something. The hours become the evidence. But time in a chair isn't learning any more than time in a garage makes you a car. It depends entirely on what you did in that chair. Karpicki and Blunt published a study in Science in 2011 that broke this open. One group studied material across 4 reading sessions. Another group studied once and then took a retrieval test. The 1-session group outperformed the 4-session group by 50% on a delayed test. 4 times the hours. Less learning. The extra time wasn't just wasted, It was building false confidence while encoding almost nothing. This is what Maya understood. The value of a study hour isn't fixed. It swings wildly depending on what you decide to do with it. An hour of rereading highlighted notes might produce 5 minutes of actual learning. An hour of targeted retrieval on your weakest material might be worth 4 conventional hours. Top students didn't have more hours. They had higher value hours. And that value was set by 3 decisions made before a single page was opened. So what are those decisions? The first one is the one Maya handed me in 7 words. And it's the most ruthless thing you can do to a textbook. I don't study what I already know. Sounds obvious. It's not. Because when I actually compared how Maya prepared versus how I prepared, the gap was embarrassing. Here's what I did before every exam. I opened the textbook to Chapter 1, read it, highlighted, took notes, moved to Chapter 2. Same thing. Linear, thorough. Every page got the same attention. Page 1 through page 300, treated with equal respect, like a buffet where I loaded my plate with everything whether I was hungry for it or not. Here's what Maya did. Before touching the textbook, she spent about 5 minutes looking at 3 things: the study guide, 2 past exams, and the professor's review notes from class. Then she grabbed a blank sheet of paper and wrote down everything she already knew about the upcoming exam topics. From memory. No notes open, no book, just whatever her brain could produce on its own. Messy, incomplete, half wrong, she didn't care. Then she held that sheet next to the exam topics and looked at the gap, the specific concepts she couldn't produce. That became her entire study session. Everything else got eliminated. Not skimmed, not quickly reviewed, gone. On a typical exam covering 6 chapters, Maya's gap list had maybe 12 to 15 specific items. That was her session. 90 minutes on 15 items. Meanwhile, I was rereading all 6 chapters, including 70% of material I could have recalled in my sleep. I spent 4 hours doing maybe 1 hour of useful work, buried under 3 hours of restudying things I already knew. Maya spent 90 minutes doing 90 minutes of useful work. Same textbook, same brain. 4 times the efficiency, because she asked one question I never thought to ask. What specifically do I not know? There's research behind why this works so well. Dr. John Dunlosky at Kent State has identified metacognitive accuracy, the ability to correctly judge what you know and don't know, as one of the strongest predictors of academic performance. Top students aren't just better at learning. They're better at diagnosing what needs to be learned. They waste almost 0 time on material they've already locked in. Average students, and I was one of them, overestimate how much they know because the fluency illusion makes recognized material feel like known material. So they spread their study time across everything, treating mastered content and unknown content with the same weight. The triage isn't just a time saver. It's the foundation that makes everything after it work. The practical version takes 5 minutes. Scan what's going to be tested. Exam guide, learning objectives, past papers. Grab a blank sheet and dump everything you already know about those topics from memory. No peeking. Then compare your sheet to the tested material. The things you couldn't produce? That's your list. That's your entire session. Everything you could produce. Skip it completely. This feels reckless, like you're leaving money on the table. Your brain will beg you to just quickly review the stuff you already know. Because reviewing familiar material feels productive. That pull is the fluency illusion doing its job. Ignore it. The review is the trap. Now, the triage tells you what to study. But even when you're aimed at the right material, most students make a second mistake the moment they sit down. They open the book and start reading. Top students do the exact opposite. Watch 2 students working on the same chapter. The first one, the average student, opens the book, reads the chapter start to finish. highlights the important-looking sentences, rereads the highlighted parts, maybe copies a few things into a notebook. Information flows in one direction, from the page to the eyes to, hopefully, the brain. Input first. Now watch the second student. Before opening the book, she reads the chapter title and the section headings, closes the book, grabs that blank sheet again, and writes down everything she thinks she knows about the topic, including guesses, half-formed ideas, wrong answers she suspects might be wrong. She's not studying yet. She's attempting to produce before she consumes. Get something wrong? Good. She just flagged exactly what needs fixing. Get something right? Also good. Confirmed Skip. Then she opens the book and reads only the parts that address what she couldn't produce. Information starts with output, and input arrives to fill the gaps. Two mechanisms explain why this works. The generation effect, documented by Slamecka and Graf in 1978, shows that when your brain attempts to produce an answer, even incorrectly, the subsequent encounter with the correct answer encodes dramatically deeper. The attempt creates a hungry slot in memory. When the right information arrives to fill it, it locks in, instead of sliding off a flat surface the way passively read information does. The second is test-enhanced learning, studied by Roediger and Karpicke. Repeated retrieval attempts produce more long-term retention than repeated study sessions, even when the attempts involve errors. The act of trying to pull something from memory is itself the learning event. Not the reading, not the highlighting, the struggle to produce. Every time you answer before you've studied the answer, you're not testing yourself, you're teaching yourself. So an output-first session looks like this. Before reading a chapter, write what you think you know. Before watching a lecture, predict what the professor will cover. Before reviewing notes, reconstruct them from memory on a blank page. After a first pass through new material, close the book and explain it out loud to an imaginary friend who knows nothing. The places where you stumble? That's your study material. The parts that flow? Skip them. This feels terrible at first. Looking at a blank page before you've studied anything and realizing you can barely produce a full sentence is demoralizing. You want to read first, because reading feels like progress, and the blank page feels like proof that you're behind. But that discomfort is the learning. The blank page isn't showing you that you're stupid. It's showing you exactly where to invest the next 60 minutes. Top students learn to love the blank page. Average students avoid it for their entire academic careers and pay for that avoidance with extra hours that produce nothing. So now you know what to study and how to start. But there's a third decision, and it's the one that explains why two students can use identical techniques on identical material and still get completely different results. It's the subtlest of the three, and it's the difference between a session that leaves traces and a session that evaporates. Think about this. You've spent an hour rereading a chapter, and it felt smooth, like you understood everything. Then you bombed the test, and you've spent an hour grinding through practice problems, feeling confused and slow the entire time. And you aced it. That's not random. That's the difficulty sweet spot. And once you understand it, the entire math of studying changes. Robert Bjork at UCLA has spent decades studying what he calls desirable difficulties, conditions that make learning harder in the moment but improve long-term retention. Testing yourself instead of rereading, spacing sessions instead of cramming, mixing problem types in the same session, interleaving, instead of doing 20 identical problems in a row. Rohrer and Taylor found interleaving produced 43% better performance on delayed tests, even though it felt worse during practice. The pattern: if studying feels easy, you're probably not learning. If it feels like a productive struggle, slow, effortful, slightly frustrating but not overwhelming, you're in the zone. Average students almost never sit in that zone. They bounce between two extremes. The comfort zone, rereading notes, re-highlighting, rewatching lectures at 1.5x. Feels smooth, feels productive, produces almost zero durable learning because the brain isn't being challenged. You think, this makes sense, when what you actually mean is, I recognize these words. Then the panic zone, staring at a problem set that might as well be in another language. 45 minutes on one question, learning nothing, because the gap between what you know and what the problem requires is too wide to bridge. The sweet spot sits between those extremes, and it has a specific feeling you can learn to recognize. Your brow furrows slightly. You lean forward without noticing. You mutter under your breath, "Wait, no." But if that's true, then you're making errors, but you're close. You can almost taste the answer. And when you finally get it right, there's a small click. Not dramatic, not cinematic, more like a joint quietly popping back into place. That click is a neural connection forming. If your study session doesn't produce clicks, you're in the wrong zone. Maya didn't just study her weak areas, she calibrated the difficulty. Concept slightly below her level? Skip the textbook, go straight to the hardest practice problems. Concept way above. Break it into subcomponents and find the one sitting at her edge. She was constantly adjusting the dial. That's why 90 minutes was enough. Every minute was calibrated. I was spending 3 hours in the comfort zone and 1 in the panic zone. Maybe 45 minutes, if I was lucky, in the sweet spot. She spent 85 of her 90 there. Now step back and look at the full picture. Think of it like surgery. A surgeon doesn't walk into the OR and start cutting everywhere. She checks the scans, identifies exactly where the issue is. That's the triage. Then she makes a precise incision at that location. Not a comprehensive exploration of the body. That's output first. Then she adjusts in real time. Not too shallow, not too deep, but at the exact depth where the problem lives. That's the sweet spot. Your study session should work the same way. You're the surgeon. The exam is the patient. And up until now, you've been opening the patient from neck to navel, hoping you'd find the problem somewhere. That's not surgery. That's butchery. 3 decisions turn butchery into precision. Here's everything packaged into 5 minutes. Do this before every study session starting today. Set a timer. 5 minutes. That's the investment. Minutes 1 and 2. The triage. Pull up what's going to be tested. Exam guide, syllabus, past papers, professor's review slides. Then grab a blank sheet. Write down everything you already know about those topics. From memory. Ugly, incomplete, stream of consciousness. No notes. No book. Just you and the paper. Whatever comes out easily, that's material you skip. Whatever doesn't come out, or comes out wrong, write it on a short list. That list is your entire session. Minutes 2 through 4. The output attempt. Before reading anything about the items on your list, try to answer them. Explain each concept out loud or in writing as if you already knew it. Get it wrong. Get it half right. Fill the page with your best guess, even when your best guess is garbage. This primes the generation effect. Your brain now has hungry gaps waiting to be filled. When you read the correct information afterward, it'll snap into those gaps like puzzle pieces into pre-cut slots, instead of bouncing off a flat surface the way it does when you read passively. Minutes 4 and 5. The difficulty check. Look at your list of weak spots. For each one, ask yourself, can I almost get this, or am I completely lost? If you can almost get it, start there. That's your sweet spot. If you're completely lost, break it down. Find the smaller concept underneath that you can almost get, and start there instead. Never open a session in the panic zone. Always start at your edge. The edge is where every minute counts. After the 5 minutes, study. But you're not reading from page 1. You're going straight to the gaps your triage identified, armed with the output attempt that primed your brain, calibrated to the difficulty level where you learn fastest. You'll study less, you'll retain more, and after 3 or 4 sessions using this protocol, you'll feel something unfamiliar. The strange sensation of actually learning instead of performing the act of studying. Maya didn't have a gift. She had a system. So subtle nobody noticed unless they watched carefully. 3 decisions, 5 minutes, and sessions that worked like a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. Now you have the same system. The only difference between you and Maya after today is whether you use it. The smartest students don't study more. They decide more, before the studying even starts. 5 minutes of strategy is worth 3 hours of effort. Your next session starts with a blank page and a timer. Tell me in the comments what subject you're applying the 5-minute protocol to tonight. Don't say, "I'll try it." Say, "Triage on biochemistry tonight," or "Output first on contract law before Thursday's exam." Specificity turns intention into action. And if this shifted how you think about studying, subscribe. I make content for people who'd rather study strategically than suffer heroically. Go make the list shorter.